Design. We're here to talk to the greatest minds in our industry about top trends in human-centric design. I'm your host, Michael Murray, CEO of Copen Corporation. Today, we're chatting about the future of the wearable AR, VR technology, specifically how we design for wearability and usability. So it makes sense that we have Charlie Fink on with us. Charlie writes the weekly Forbes column, This Week in XR, and co-hosts its companion podcast. He is also the author of two critically acclaimed books, AR-enabled books, and teaches at Chapman University and at ASU. So thank you, Charlie, for being here. It's wonderful to have you. So let's explore the future here and talk about something that's near and dear to my heart and yours, the future of AR and VR.
Michael, thank you for having me. I'm not used to being the person. I'm used to asking questions. I'm not used to answering them.
Me as well.
You've turned the tables on me. So I always feel like I should be interviewing you. But I just, AWE was last week, Augmented World Expo, which is one of the most important events in the calendar year for everybody in this industry. It's a gathering of industry experts, executives, companies, entrepreneurs, artists. There's presence from some of the big companies like Meta, but they're not the stars of the show. Developers are the stars of the show there. So it's a really unique gathering because, as you know, most conferences are developer conferences put on by Microsoft and Meta and Google and so forth to talk about their own products. But in this case, you're looking at the whole industry from 100,000 feet, which is great. You get a sense of what's going on. For example, I predicted that AWE this year would be all about the convergence of AR and AI, right? Roni Abovitz, my podcast co-host, who founded Magic Leap, has said many times he thinks AI is exactly what AR has been waiting for. So I expected the show to be all about that. And you saw some signs of it last year in 2023, but it really was, this year was about mixed reality. And, people are all about the Quest 3 and the Apple Vision Pro. So you saw a lot of things on the floor that were leveraging those pass-through mixed reality applications. And some, terrific, creative, imaginative work. VR and AR are not new anymore. So some of the applications and some of the work is getting quite sophisticated and exciting, and people are getting more ambitious. But that said, I would still say this is the beginning of the beginning. I was here at the beginning in the 90s, and it's still the beginning. So I don't know what to say. I may be losing my religion at this point.
Well, you've been a critic of the current technology in AR and VR. Tell us more about what you see in terms of wearability and some of the issues that you think are still gating adoptions at this point.
Well, maybe I'll turn that over and ask you. Again, I set consumer apart from enterprise, which is really about training and simulation, or it's about adding technology to existing platforms. So I think that's a horse of a different color, if you will, than consumer.
Well, I think it's interesting because when I think about the Apple II Vision Pro or Quest, there are applications that make sense for those technologies. And then there are some applications that we thought were going to make sense for those technologies that clearly don't. Because to your point, the juice isn't worth the squeeze, right? And the cantilever weight that you get in the back of your neck holding up a couple of pounds on your nose, it's not going to happen. And one of the things that we've started to think about at Copen is, can a microdisplay become a sensor, right? Is it a sensor? And the answer is yes. With our neural display capability and technology, it will become a sensor to understand what your eye is doing, what that human-centric issue is that the person might be involved in at that given time. So I absolutely agree with you. I think a sensor system is where AR is really going. But to control that, to use that information that makes sense, you need AI, because one of the interesting papers that I read from Night Vision Labs is you only have 500 microseconds to make a decision for the human brain to be tricked into thinking that it's looking at something natural. as opposed to something that's actually just a video overlay of the real world. So that's a very quick type of decision that needs to be made. And I think the only way that you can do that is either through AI or machine learning. And that's why Kopin's partnered with MIT, not the Media Lab, but the CCL Lab, for AI development for sensor systems.
I,
'Cause we-
I always liked the Kopin approach, and I love John Fan. I thought he was a brilliant scientist and a good teacher.
Yep.
And he, again, very early, like back in the early part of me covering XR, although I was involved in the 90s when I was at Disney, I didn't start covering it again until 2016.
Yep.
So, in my 2016 journey, John Fan figured prominently in the early years of my research. He was a frequent source for me. And he was a big believer in microdisplays, but the kind that you could push out of the way when you're not using them. So, okay, I need work instructions. Thank you, little mini computer. And then you push it out of the way so that it is a wearable, but it is not intrusive. You call upon it as a tool, like you would take out a screwdriver. And then when you're done with the screw, you stick it back in your belt and you forget you have it. And I thought that was a great way of looking at the technology specifically for enterprises, which was a focus of Kopin's at the time, because the customers were people wearing hard hats, not people sitting in offices or driving cars.
Right.
So I think that was very insightful of him. Of course, the problem with enterprise is separate, but let me get back to what because we were on this track about consumers, and I think that's a good topic to dwell on for just a minute, because Meta made an error in strategy that everyone has made, and both of us would have made had we been working at Meta at the time, which is they looked at VR as a game machine. It's primarily a game machine because first adopters are gamers. They want to play games. So we're building a game machine. And I remember MetaConnect in 2021, they were talking about the internet. They changed their name to Meta, and they went on and on and on about games.
The metaverse.
Horizon, and none of it has worked.
Right.
And I've never seen a company work so hard to put a game face on something that is an obvious failure. They've had $2 billion in App Store scales in 4 years. Let me just put that in perspective. Call of Duty made $2 billion in a weekend.
Yeah.
And they say, oh, well, 20 developers have made over $10 million. Well, that's great. Are they individuals? That would be great if they're individuals. If they're companies, $10 million over 4 years barely keeps the door open. So games were an utter failure. So along comes mixed reality. And by the way, gamers prefer console games. There are a lot of obvious reasons for that. For one thing, you pay $60 for a console game. So far, you pay $60 for a console game, you play it forever.
Right.
VR games have 15 hours of gameplay in them, so your entertainment per hour is expensive.
It is.
And people care about that a lot. What's interesting, and there's so many things about the Quest that should concern us. I mean, the level of attrition, the number of them that people buy them, they have great enthusiasm, and then they move on. So I like to say that VR has been damned with faint praise. So, for example, I have students at Chapman who are, in the XR minor, and I saw one of them last semester. And I was like, oh, how was your summer? What did you do? Did you spend any time in VR? He goes, no, I didn't spend any time in VR. I'm like, but you're an XR minor. I mean, this is like your college degree. I thought you loved it. So, oh, I do love it, but I had appointments on other screens. And I thought that was very telling. That is the story of the Oculus Quest. It is damned with faint praise, but we can't keep using hardware as an excuse. Now, the pass-through technology we have is terrific. It's super impressive on the Vision Pro, and really pretty nice on the Quest 3. Again, I think we have to stop blaming the quality of our technology for the fact that consumer XR hasn't really caught on yet. But we don't know what's going to make it catch on. right? What is our Sopranos, right? What is the app that makes everybody say, I'm going to go, a Quest is cheap, it's $200. I'm going to go buy a Quest. I don't care. If all I look at is the Sopranos, it will have been worth it.
Right. Right.
But
I
we
exactly.
haven't,
I absolutely
in
agree.
years, we haven't had that.
So remember, I was a big BlackBerry user, right? And I remember sitting in the offices of BlackBerry when the original iPhone came out. And they said, no one's going to use that. There's no reason to use that. It's just a music device. People won't use it. And then I started to, and I was one of those people that believed that narrative until the apps started to come out. And I started using it to look at my stocks, starting to use it to understand how many steps I take. Oh, wait a second, it has this browser that's really interesting. So all of a sudden, it's about the adoption rate and the ability to make sure that there's some sort of strategic control, which was at that point, and this goes back to my learning at MIT from the systems dynamic professor that said it's all about strategic control and the adoption rate. Once iTunes came out and you started to use that for your contacts, your music, and all the apps, then it became an ecosystem that kept pulling you back, right? And right now, AR, VR doesn't have that ecosystem yet. It doesn't have the killer app that I have to go to and put that on my head for more than an hour at a time. It doesn't have that yet. I think it's coming, but it's not here yet.
What do you think it could be?
I have a very good friend of mine who has a great theory, who I think is right, by the way, but I don't know if I can share it on this podcast or this. You could probably understand what it is, but I think that unlocks a lot of technologies these days. But I think ultimately, I think it's movies. I think it's content. I definitely think it's going to be an interactive type of gaming approach, but not the gaming approach that we've seen in the past where you're a single person playing a game. I think it needs to have some better hooks than it currently has. So in my view, I think it's going to be the Netflix, the Disney type of approach where it's an interactive movie where you're part of it. And I think that's a big investment that these firms are making currently. And it has that AR, VR type of feel to it. I think that's really going to force people or enable people to use this technology. And one thing that we're learning is the human-centric design is actually gating that, meaning people are not using their technology for more than 20, 30 minutes because physically it hurts them in their ears, it hurts their eyes, there's too much cantilever weight on their nose and the back. So folks are literally leaning back.
That is certainly true of the Vision Pro, which is an ergonomic disaster. In fact, I'm a little surprised at Apple. I don't understand why Apple, having offloaded the battery, which makes sense because batteries get hot and you don't want them on your head. So they offloaded the battery. And why didn't they offload the rest of the compute so the thing doesn't weigh 400 grams.
Right. And if you look at our CR3 design that we designed for surgeons, it's exactly that. It's very balanced from front to back, and a lot of the electronics is in the back itself. It's still wired because it needs the power, it needs the speed, but it's very lightweight, ergonomic, and easy to put on your head for an 8-hour surgery. But I don't think they're thinking it like that. I think this is going to be a platform that they need to bring the apps to. And then the users will come. I don't think it's going to be the other way around because I think they already got that wrong.
You're talking about surgeons. That's an interesting, we can pivot away from consumers to enterprise for a second, because I think the enterprise applications are really compelling and numerous. And the riddle, and perhaps it should come as no surprise, is how slow enterprise adoption of XR technology has been. And maybe that's a engineering conceptual thing that when engineers create new manufacturing methods, they'll take that technology into account. But getting XR technology into pre-existing industrial workflows seems to be really, really hard. And the biggest companies are struggling because of it. Microsoft is going to put a bullet in the HoloLens if IVAS doesn't succeed. And there's no reason to think it's going to succeed and every reason to think it's going to fail. Although I will say it has many champions inside of the service. So
Yes.
there are people who want it to work, but every time they put it on actual soldiers in a simulation, it's a disaster.
Well, I think that we're fairly close to this type of technology, as you know.
Yeah.
One of the things that we've learned is soldiers don't stay still for very long, right? Number one. Number two, when you get shot at or you're involved in some sort of altercation, every human being, Charlie, hits what's called fight or flight mode. And that's when your hands start to shake, your heart goes up, your adrenaline starts to pump. And what happens to your pupils at that point in time? Boom, they blow. And when they do that, the amount of brightness that you get from a microdisplay sitting an inch from your eye might be too much. And that's why we developed the neural display technology. As your pupil gets too large, turn down the brightness, turn up the contrast, right? And do that within 500 milliseconds or
Yeah,
microseconds.
that's
The
great.
reason for that is that neurological response that you and I go through as human beings has to be accounted for. And the other thing that is interesting, you brought up surgeons real quick. I think for the viewers and listeners, when you think about changing lanes in a vehicle, okay, you've got your hands 10 and 2, hopefully, and you go to check your blind spot. If you just see that my hands, they slightly turn, even though I'm
Hmm.
not turning them very much. If you're a surgeon looking up at a screen and then down at your patient,
Yeah,
your
they've been
hands
fighting.
move.
They've been complaining about screen pollution for decades.
Right.
The and anesthesiologists still have to tell the surgeon out loud with their voice what's going on.
That's right.
And the surgeon should just have a monitor in their headset. That's like a 200 years old technique already.
That's right.
Um, but and again, let's not forget the medical system is run by scientists. They like technology. They're not afraid of technology. Um, they know they can just take the thing off and do it the other way, but they
Mhm.
keep those devices on. Look, they wear surgical loops. I mean, so doctors are already wearing a heavy headset.
That's right.
So you take away, you make it better, and they're happy.
That's right.
That's
And
why
it's more
so
of a
many. That's why Magic Leap is targeting the medical vertical.
yeah, 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 as are we. And I think our approach is a little bit different because if you're looking down at the patient, the bridge of your nose will have the display. So that way
Mhm.
you don't have to move your head, you just move your eyes up and down.
Right,
So that way
right.
that takes away the torque on the back of your neck and that movement. And this is the math behind it. There is billions of dollars of loss when it comes to malpractice because of, quite frankly, surgeons moving their head to see something and it moves their hand.
Mm.
Oops. And that's the math behind it. So, but I think going back to enterprise, it's common knowledge. Copen was at the leading edge of developing, enterprise technologies for industrial, and quite frankly, it was a horrific failure, probably a catastrophic failure from a standpoint of technology. I don't think we sold more than $5 million worth over the course of the life of that technology, and it was a pretty big failure because, again, going back to your original thesis, is the application wasn't there. There wasn't the need to have this level of compute on your head and then have to charge it, update it,
Right.
etc.
Endure all the friction that comes along
The
with it.
friction wasn't worth the squeeze, right? So going back to that same sort of theory, are we there now for enterprise? Maybe, maybe not. Consumer, not yet. I think though for medical, yes, I think that is a market that is still
Yeah, that's a
nascent,
success story.
but that's going to be a high success and definitely for defense. We introduced what we
Here's
call
the
our
thing about defense that I have not understood. Maybe you can have some. You can
sure.
tell me a little bit about this. I never understood why they went with the HoloLens instead of a micro display, right? Because what the hell are they doing? They're calling in airstrikes. They're trying to, they're using maps. They're trying to identify friendlies. I mean, what's the display for? I mean, what is it? Doesn't have to be in front of your head. You're like, I need a map. Boom, here it is. Thank you, map. Go away.
Right.
Right. And that way, if I'm being shot at, I'm not dealing with it. It's just hanging off my
Yep.
helmet with my radio and everything else. Those things they're really light and they're cheap now. So that you can mash one up on every mission. No one will care.
Mhm.
And it seems the ruggedization of it is so much more straightforward than what you have to do for a HoloLens with all those cables and wires and I just don't. What is spatial? What does a soldier have to do that is spatial?
Nothing. Nothing. And if I I've given this example many times, but if you remember the old projectors that you would have on the top of the your ceiling in an office, or put on the table of your conference room, and then you'd have the pull down projector,
Yeah.
and you hit the table, and what happens is the entire image bounces on the screen, right? And it multiplies as the distance goes. That's the problem with HoloLens. If you have a projection and you move that projector, what happens to the image? It multiplies that vibration. And again, the last I checked, soldiers don't stand still for very long. And one of the interesting things that we're learning is the fundamental physics behind the HoloLens technology, and that approach doesn't work well in environments like that. Number one. Number two, it's also a great technology. It's beautiful. I will absolutely say it is gorgeous to spot.
Oh, it is cool as shit.
It's amazing.
It's so cool. Yeah.
But unfortunately, again, it doesn't solve the human-centric design problems.
Mm-hmm.
One, it's too big. Two, too power hungry. Three, that vibration issue is causing nausea still to this day. People are still getting nauseous using this technology. And it also has a load of cameras. And I think we're experiencing now the size, weight, and power consumption issues on that technology. And one of the things that, last plug for Copen here, one of the things that's really interesting about Copen is we have an IVAS Now strategy that is very simple, a daytime strategy for less than £1. You throw it in your pack. It gives you telemetry, run left, run right. Your buddies are here, the bad guys are there. Because in daytime, actually, that's where most guys get lost, because frankly, there is no telemetry. In nighttime, we now have a nighttime vision system that injects thermals. Again, throw it in your backpack. It's less than £1. And you can use that today.
All right, exactly. So minimal friction, maximum benefit.
Absolutely. And we'll get IVAS right in the future. That I believe in. IVAS will be the future, but it's going to
I just don't know if it's going to be IVAS as we currently know it with the HoloLens, because I think that was just too much technology trying to solve a really straightforward problem for which there were plenty of solutions. But for some reason, they got sidetracked by spatial, which was very seductive and advanced technology, but not the right tool for this job.
I agree. Well, listen, Charlie, we've run out of time already.
What? This was such a good conversation.
I know.
I'm going to sit in the guest chair more often.
Yeah, no, you're a very humble guest, and I appreciate it. And you've been very kind to me and Copen, and we really appreciate your insights. And it's been a pleasure discussing.
Copen is a great company, and I'm glad to see you guys have found a new strategic direction that's going to lead to your long-term success. So keep it up, and we'll see you at the next show.
Well, thanks, Charlie. Well, please feel free to click subscribe to get an alert for our next episode of Human by Design. And remember, you can always comment with questions, and we'll be sure to answer them. So thank you very much for joining. We have the world's best thought leaders in AR/VR technology with Charlie Fink attending today. So thank you, Charlie. We appreciate it. And
I really